go to mute, just so that we don't have too many interruptions from kids or puppies or that kind of thing. That would be very appreciated. Okay, thanks, Josh. Take it away.
Yeah, thank you, Colleen. And uh, I know this sounds like an excuse, but honestly, it isn't. My computer crashed at like 7:56, right when I was getting ready to log on and make sure my screen looked okay and audio worked and all that. So sorry for being a little bit late. I swear I've already been on a meeting this morning prior to this. Um, well, it's nice to be here. Thanks, Colleen, and nice to see some familiar faces from NOLA. Um, this is the second legislative session that I have worked with NOLA, and it's been a fun group to work with, and I really feel good about what we're trying to do. So as Colleen mentioned, just a couple of words about how legislative session is going. I'm sure everybody's aware that the legislature is meeting almost entirely virtually this year. There are a few members that are in the chambers, the sort of leadership, and so that they can actually manage floor activity when they're moving bills on the floor. And then also some members, you'll probably, some of you, this will resonate with some of you. Some members live in areas where they actually don't have sufficient internet access that they can do legislative session from home. So there are some members around, but the public is prohibited from being on campus. We're prohibited from being on campus. Haven't seen any legislators in person in months and months now. Last week, I think you may have heard on the news that at the same day that our U.S. Capitol was stormed, there was disturbance at our Washington State Capitol. Ever since then, there's been National Guard on campus. It is fenced down. It is bizarre. I've worked in Olympia on the campus for over 20 years. I've never seen anything like it. It's really amazing. And I think today, as a result, though, I will say they're really not expecting much activity on campus where there usually would be lots of protest. Nobody knows how this virtual format was going to work, and so I was amongst the group, I think, that was very sort of skeptical about how well it was going to function. I've been personally pretty impressed, actually, with how the first week and a half has gone so far. They've primarily been conducting committee hearings, and some of you may have already participated, but they're actually taking testimony now in a virtual format from pretty much anywhere in the state. And what you're really seeing is that there's just a lot more participation. They're getting a lot of people from different that you don't sort of normally see. They're getting what they call real people as opposed to us lobbyists that are coming in and testifying, which is pretty cool, honestly. The committee chairs, for the most part, are doing a good job managing the process, and so it's going pretty smoothly. Um, they have adopted the first day they came in person, they adopted new rules that allow them to meet virtually. So they were all here. That went pretty fine. And I guess the reason I bring that up is they actually have to adopt those on the floor. They can't be just done in committee action. And so they've moved not just the new rules, but also there's about 14 bills in total that have moved out of committee and are now on the floor of either chamber, ready for floor action. So I think that'll be the next test of sort of how this whole process works when they have to really run amendments and those types of things. They did have a pretty heated debate last week on extending the governor's emergency orders. Um, Throughout this COVID environment, the governor on a monthly basis has had, I think there's 20 or 30 different emergency orders that really just have to do with sort of conducting government business. One of them that we, on behalf of local governments, have watched really closely was authorization for local governments to meet virtually under the Open Public Meetings Act. They've had, because the governor's authority only extends for a month at a time, they had to be renewed every month. And so the legislature took action to extend those authorities permanently until the end of the emergency, which was really hotly debated because a lot of primarily Republicans didn't think, they wanted some actual discussion in committees about that. They didn't want to just approve it. And so the reason I bring this up is they had a strong robust floor debate with amendments and everything, and it took several hours, but they actually managed to get something done. So I guess that's a really long-winded way of saying virtual session seems like it's working, um, and they're sort of patching it together. The next big step for legislative process is February 14th, or sorry, February 15th is the day that bills have to get out of committee and move to the floor if they're going to be considered still live for the legislative session. So we're close to halfway done with committee action. They shortened up that committee work at the beginning of session to give themselves more time on the floor because they know it's going to take a little bit longer. So far, other than the debate about the governor's emergency authorities, the big topics of discussion in committees have been, COVID relief, COVID response. Police reform is really probably taken up, I would say, as a percentage, 60% or so of the time. There's a lot of police reform bills going forward. Um, I'll talk about this a little bit more in detail, but employment security has been one of the other big topics, and trying to stabilize the trust fund and minimize the impact on employers has been discussed a lot. The both of the chambers at the beginning of session tried to put some filters in place for proposals coming forward. They're really trying to encourage members not to introduce as many bills, really trying to stay narrowly focused. They are, COVID relief, pandemic relief, response, the budget, um, equity is probably the top one for everyone, for both chambers. And in the House, they added climate change. And, again, I guess I should have said at the beginning that I think everybody probably knows the Democrats control the House, the Senate, and the governor's mansion. And so they're with strong enough majorities that they can really drive pretty much the entire agenda. And so those filters you see are reflective of what that agenda from a Democratic perspective is. They haven't been in the House. They told members they only get to introduce 7 bills. It doesn't seem like members are necessarily sticking to that. We're seeing some members are introducing more bills than that, but we are seeing less bills than you would normally see. It also, those filters, just because bills are getting introduced that are outside of those filters, doesn't mean that that's the only thing that they're necessarily, in fact, going to move. I think that's a big question for lobbyists, is how closely do they stick with that guidance, or do they abandon that? NOLA. We took a pretty, NOLA's mission is essentially within the North Olympic Peninsula, both Jefferson and Clallam counties, to advance and enhance the economic prosperity of the region, the quality of life of the region. This summer, we really kind of took a little bit of a, I don't want to say step back, but we did some additional outreach into the Jefferson County part of NOLA, and primarily had been working with Brian Koo at the Jefferson EDC team, and last session, and he really helped us reach out to the port, the city, the county, the PUD, and really did some outreach on the Jefferson side. So we really this fall recognized that we had to have a more disciplined conversation about sort of how NOLA was going to be making decisions, and who was really representative of NOLA. There was a steering committee appointed of both Clallam, Jefferson, and tribal representatives. And that group has been meeting through the fall. The first order of business was really sort of dusting off the charter, for NOLA, revamping it for this new truly Jefferson Clallam partnership, talking about how decisions were going to be made. The steering committee adopted a short-term charter for the group. The intent is that after legislative session, the steering committee will be getting together and talking about long-term operating principles and how how NOLA is going to work to make sure that it is representative of both the Jefferson and Clallam County regions. But the short-term goal obviously was setting 2021 legislative priorities. And we did that. We had some preliminary discussion at the steering committee. We went out with a poll for all of the steering committee members, did some voting, and then came back together and talked about it again. So at the end of the day, they chose 3 priorities, which is important from a legislative strategic perspective. Most legislators, most organizations don't really have the capacity or the ability to move more than a couple of issues. It's kind of just a bandwidth in strategy perspective. The other practical thing is that my contract with NOLA is to advance 3 priorities, and so that's what we are focusing on. It was sort of funny. NOLA, at the end of the day, we did choose 3 priorities, but there were a number of priorities that we couldn't quite take off the list. And so we have basically a tier 1 set of priorities and then a tier 2 set of priorities, which I think is a good approach. So the top 3 priorities were broadband and broadband expansion, financial relief for businesses impacted by COVID, and then support for the Marine Economic Opportunity Act. On broadband, there is support for both the $45 million request that the Public Works Board is making for additional infrastructure, and then also to support the authority for public entities to provide retail internet service, which is a bill that Representative Drew Hansen from Kitsap County is introducing. And actually that was just introduced last night. So we have a bill number on that now. We also have seen a proposal from the Community Economic Revitalization Board, CURB Board, is putting forward legislation to permanently codify their broadband program. They also have an appropriation in that bill for $100 million total for CURB. I don't actually know what portion of that $100 million, it would be for all the CURB programs. I think it was $15 million they were asking for originally for broadband, but I don't know that that's actually the case in this bill. This is a subject area that is still, going to be subject to a lot of discussion. We haven't seen a ton of hearings on these bills. A lot of it's going to be budget discussion. So other than kind of the pieces getting put on the chessboard, there hasn't been a whole lot of action in this subject matter area. The second one, providing financial relief for businesses impacted by COVID, is also primarily going to be a budget discussion. NOLA really did focus in on a couple of things here. One was, wanting to be clear that we're talking about COVID impacts. We're not just talking about general business support. We also really determined that we thought it would be helpful for businesses to receive early direct cash grant help from the state budget stabilization account, under the theory that, and I think accurate theory, that additional federal relief, as we have seen, is going to be slow to roll out and a little bit difficult just to figure out the rules and how all of these new programs work. I'm encouraged that Senator Rolfes, who's the chair of the Ways and Means Committee in the Senate, has put forward a bill that would appropriate $200 million from the state rainy day fund, the budget stabilization account, which is intended to provide immediate assistance to small businesses in the form of, I think $100 million is loans, and $100 million is grants. There's some criteria for, which businesses would get it. The bill hasn't moved yet, but it is, a lot of Democratic leadership have signed on to the bill. And I think, more than anything, that just signals an intent and a desire by Democratic leadership to get business support out as early as possible. The other nice thing about this bill is that it's not tied to the state operating budget. Um, if you've watched the legislature before, you know the budget is usually one of the very, not if the very last thing they do. Um, so waiting until the end of session is not what we prefer. Having this be a standalone bill means that they can get it done earlier than the budget, and we're kind of hopeful that that will be the case for them. I should add also that just in the last couple days, the House Republican budget lead dropped a bill as well that talks about appropriating dollars directly out of the budget stabilization account. It is largely, I didn't see as much in there about business economic relief. It is largely for unemployment benefits, for COVID response, testing, vaccinations, those types of things. But I guess the philosophy of spending down the rainy day fund for COVID response is one that is being embraced by both parties. The last of the three priorities was the Marine Economic Opportunity Act, and that's House Bill 1107. And the Port of Port Angeles, their lobbyist, Bruce Beckett, brought this to my attention as something that he thought would be at least consistent with NOLA's priorities. This is a partnership we're getting a lot of support from across the state. The Northwest Marine Trades Association is actually taking the lead on it now. And the bill essentially would change the tax treatment for services and goods when vessels are outfitted in a Washington port for chartering. Right now, we have a very high tax rate, and so there's basically not very many vessels come in and charter out of Washington ports because it's so expensive for them. So this would reduce that tax, would allow and incentivize charters to come out of Washington, sorry. And you know, the nice thing about this is it would be helpful not only for our local economies in those port towns, Port Angeles, Port Townsend, et cetera, but since these vessels aren't coming into our waters or being outfitted in our waters now, there's no negative impact for the state either. So it shouldn't cost them a whole lot of money. I have been working really closely with Bruce and the lobbyists for the Northwest Marine Trade Association, as well as the Port of Port Townsend, sorry. And we've been talking to legislators this week and trying to make sure there's support for it. We really are. I'm actually feeling more optimistic about this, I think, than maybe even a week or so ago. Looking pretty good on that one. I just would briefly mention the other items that NOLA identified, but we're not putting as high a priority on, our support for the childcare system. And I will just say that I'm not even tracking all the bills on this because that's such a hot topic for the legislature. There's a lot of discussion going on around helping the childcare system out. Tax increment finance for infrastructure, which is a city and county infrastructure financing tool. That bill is getting heard this week. In fact, it might be today or tomorrow that the hearing is on that one. Jefferson County is really pushing to have the authority for their .09 economic development funds extended so that they can bond against that revenue stream. That bill was just on the introduction sheets last night. So that's moving forward. I mentioned before the unemployment insurance stabilization. The impact here, or the issue here, right, is that because so many people got laid off because of COVID, and largely because of state, maybe not largely, but significantly because of state mandates to not have people working. Our unemployment trust fund took a significant reduction, in addition, obviously, to the fraud that occurred. And so employers are now, I'm sure you're hearing about this, are getting their first statements for what the impact for this will be. And it's just dramatic, right? hundreds of percentage of increase in their rates. So the intent of this legislation, and Governor Inslee put forward a bill as part of his budget proposal um, that it does a variety of things. It sets up the structure so that the state can accept a loan from the federal government to balance out the trust fund. It also puts in place essentially a way to smooth out the rates for employers. The bill, sorry, I'll give you the number here as soon as I find it. The bill is 5061. It has already moved out of the Senate committee. It was a bipartisan vote. There was a lot of support from employer and business organizations, but there was also a lot of discussion just about needing to continue and perfect this policy. There's a lot of concern about the fact that employers are going to be paying for the cost of the theft that occurred, and that's, I mean, I guess I would say inappropriate. So I think there will be some movement around this area, but I really do think that that bill is going to be the vehicle, and that this will definitely be something the legislature does something around. I'm not quite sure what it'll be at the end of the day. Two other issues that were on the list: providing tools and resources for affordable housing and homelessness. There's a lot that's happening in that area too, sort of similar to childcare. I'm not even tracking all the bills in this area. And then finally, trying to do something to amend prevailing wage laws to incentivize the use of local contractors. And haven't seen anything on that one, but we're obviously paying attention to that space. So that's the NOLA priorities. That's the work that I'm doing so far. We're only in week 2. There's lots more to do here. And for those of you that are on the steering committee, I'm sending you a weekly report on how our priorities are doing and keeping track of that. So those are my comments. I see a lot of comments in the chat box. I guess I'm curious, Colleen, do you want me to go through the chat box and remind
How about, so I wrote a bunch of the questions, trying not to interrupt you, but also I'm working on not interrupting people and writing down my questions. So I thought I'd just write it down in the chat. And if you wrote a question in here, I'll go ahead and call on you. But so one of the questions I had was, which of the legislators will get to decide if those filters are really adhered to? Will that be the Rules Committee or just leadership? How will that work?
It'll be a leadership decision,
Okay.
ultimately. Yeah, I would anticipate that, whenever there's a bill that is moving forward in the process, usually it's around when they get onto the floor, they'll go into caucus and they'll talk about issues and topics. And that's really where I think a lot of that will get ironed out. But ultimately, the speaker in the House and the majority leader in the Senate can put their foot on issues whenever they want. I think it's, everybody's interested to see how they enforce, how well they enforce those rules. It'll be a little bit of socialized enforcement.
Okay. Also, I know that both Senator Vandeweghe and Representative Chapman are working on a bill with their natural resources staff and DNR staff to require DNR to harvest red cedar salvage and residuals and alder, because apparently when they harvest a 60, 80, 100 acre tract, they're leaving those items there. And that means PA Hardwoods, a mill here locally, and Pacific Northwest Products, one in Forks, they're not getting nearly the supply they need. So they've asked me, I've been very involved with that, and they're planning on sponsoring bills and that will go through their committees. Do you know of other bills that our 3 legislators have been that have written more than just sponsored?
No, I don't know more than just sponsored. I can run a report here that will show me all of the bills that they've each sponsored. I'm trying to think about how to get that to you. But I have not done that
Okay.
beforehand, Colleen. Yeah.
Okay, no worries. And then it looks like, oh, can you share with everyone if they wanted to testify or if they just want to listen in? What is that process?
Yeah, so I shared in the chat box here the link to go and sign up to testify.
Okay,
And what happens is you have up until an hour before the hearing to sign in and testify, which is a huge change. Usually it was the day of. So the schedule for the next week will come out on Wednesday night. As soon as you see that bill, you can go to that link and sign up for any bills. Once you sign up to testify, and there's a number of options. One option is to send just written testimony, and you can click that link and send a note. One option is to sign in on a bill but not testify, and that'll put you in the record as your position. You only get pro con. And then the third option is to testify. If you sign up to testify, you have to put your email address in, and they'll send you a link to Zoom. And then at the time that the hearing is, you'll click on that link, and then when it's your turn to testify, they'll let you in. And lots of people are figuring out. One of the things that this is totally an aside. One of the things I thought that was really cool, they had a hearing on the governor's budget, and in the budget, a lot of our state spending goes to social services types of programs. You had a lot of people, a lot of disabled people that were able to actually testify. Some were actually not able to speak, but they were using computers to type in their testimony, and it was reading for them. It was really cool, and you would not normally see at least that many people of disability being able to testify. It was neat. Somebody
do you
just added.
anticipate that that the legislature will continue to allow this process even next year when they aren't hopefully under these COVID restrictions?
I think it really remains to be seen. I think there will be an incredible pressure for them to continue. I think it'd be really hard for them to go back on it now. One of the things that will be difficult is how do you integrate having people live in person in the room testifying and then switch over to people that are online. Right now it's easy because all the legislators are online themselves. So I'm not quite sure how that technology works, but yeah, I think it'll be interesting. Somebody in the chat box said you only get a minute to testify. That is generally true. It depends on the hearing, how many other people are signed up to testify. You also should be prepared that you may not get to testify. There's so much volume now that not everyone is getting to testify, which was always the case before. But now it's just much more dramatic.
Okay. Lena had a question.
So my question is, do we know if there's been conversation on the employment security tax rates on whether those are going to be retroactively reduced? That's in previous conversations with our legislators, that was kind of my impression, but I'm wondering if there's been any conversation about it with this whole process.
I don't know, Lena. I'm sorry. I have not been tracking that issue in enough detail to tell you specifically. Someone, you would be able to see it in that bill that I mentioned. I could put the bill number in too. And then somebody else asked the question, this is related to yours as well, about how you can watch even if you don't want to testify. All of these hearings are on TVW, including online. In fact, the better way to watch them now is online. On your cable channel, you only have one channel and you just get to watch whatever they're showing you. But when you go online to their website at tvw.org and you look particularly in the archive, you can see all the hearings that have happened recently or otherwise. And also it'll show you, if you go up to schedule up in the top right corner, it'll show you what's currently coming up, and you can watch in real time what's going on too. Now, obviously you can't participate through TVW, but you can at least see in real time what's going on. Somebody asked, how do you access the written bills? I'll put the link in here for that too.
And Tom Sanford has a question.
Yeah, thanks. I've been in a couple legislative meetings that have been really talking about how the state can do stimulus and really feeling like the capital budget is the main place where real stimulus money can come through. Have you heard, what are you hearing out there about levels of the capital budget, for example?
That's a really good question. It's actually something I wanted to bring up. Thank you. That unlike the federal government, the state has to pass a balanced budget, right? So they can't deficit spend, which is what the federal government's doing now for all this stimulus money. So the capital budget really is probably the major lever that they have for stimulus. Gosh, I should have looked at this beforehand. They have, I want to say about $4 billion typically in the typical biennial capital budget. A lot of that will go to state facilities. Think about, college campuses, corrections facilities, those types of facilities. A good amount of that, it's usually about $70 million a year, gets distributed out to individual community projects, city, county, nonprofits, arts programs, just stuff in your community. There's, usually about $100 million, $150 million spent in the Washington Wildlife Recreation Program, which is parks and habitat acquisition, riparian, farmland preservation, those types of programs. We are hearing they're going to do a capital budget maybe earlier than usual, so that those dollars can get out as quickly as possible. And obviously Steve Theringer is right in the middle of all of that.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
So let's see here.
I put the link there for where to look at bills. It's, if you don't know the specific bill number that you're looking for, you pretty much have to go down to, if you just want to look at all the bills that have been introduced, there's a link that says bill status report, formerly daily status. And you can essentially see the entire list of bills.
So is there, let's talk about broadband a little bit more. I know there's Representative Hansen's bill. There's a couple, one about more focused on education. Is there one so far that is gaining traction, and is there a particular committee or a legislator in the House and Senate that are really driving those conversations?
Broadband is one of the few issues that is pretty much universally of interest for the legislature. I mentioned Representative Hansen is the one that is really leading the charge on public retail authority, public entity retail authority. On the infrastructure side, I don't think there is a particular person. I don't think of a particular person. Probably Representative Theringer, Senator Frocht, because of the capital budget involvement, will be the most influential. And then there's another conversation going on that's led by Representative Gregerson out of the 33rd district around equity, and how do you, make sure that it's not just about infrastructure, but also about communities of color, and how do you actually get them the background and the knowledge and the understanding to be able to even use broadband if they have it in their community.
Mm-hmm.
I'll put the bill number for Hansen's bill up too here in a second. I see a hand up too.
Oh, Reve.
Colleen, I haven't been following the broadband, and this is probably more for you, but we in December got Starlink beta here in Forks and have been using that pretty successfully, but the upfront cost is a huge constraint for a lot of people. I know this is a more immediate, maybe not the best choice. Broadband may be better. I don't know. I haven't followed that, but is there any sort of grants for some low income people to get better internet through Starlink right now, just to kind of fill that void that we have out here?
I don't think it's been talked about, but it's a really good idea. Particularly, you know, you talk about that equity lens. I know we at NOLA have talked about equity also being sort of rural areas. I think that would be something maybe to talk to Representative Theringer about. I mean, you could do that out of the capital budget.
Could we? If it's just, I mean, because this is upfront, it's $500 to get the Starlink dish for any household or business. So would that fit into, and then it's $100 per month after that?
Yeah, actually, you're right. Probably not if you're not talking about hard costs. Probably would have to come out of operating. But there is a desire, I guess, to make sure and get broader access. So I think it's worth a conversation.
Okay. I'll put up that on my list to do, and I'll CC you, Reve. Let's see.
I did look, Colleen, quickly while we're talking. So far, the only bill that Chapman has introduced is the Marine Economic Opportunity Act. I can continue doing this just for curiosity while we're talking on other stuff.
Brian wrote that Senator Vandeweghe has 10 bills, Theringer has 5, and Chapman has 1.
Yeah, so Theringer has the capital budget and the bond bill, which is related to capital budget.
Mm-hmm.
He has 2 about long-term services, which is a in-home care.
Mm-hmm. So what about Senate Bill 5114 concerning safely reopening Washington? And it's scheduled for a hearing right now, I guess. Do you think that has any legs?
I don't think so. It is bipartisan in both the House and the Senate.
So, and that's the one that basically takes the current governor's reopening plan and says, nope, we're going back to the former one. And I know the Hospitality Association sent out a big Act Now, and that's gone out to all the chambers. So to kind of give more authority at the local level, or anyway, to change the current situation. And you don't think that's going to have legs? I think they're going to have a lot of testimony about it in support of it.
There's huge testimony on it. I think I read somewhere that there's like 300 people signed up to testify already on it. There's a lot of support for it.
And that's Senator Braun's bill, is that right?
Senator Braun and Senator Mullet. And actually, there's a House version now, and Representative Chapman is the number 2 signer on it. I don't know.
Do you know where our other 2 legislators sit on it? That issue, or Senator Vandeweghe and Representative Theringer supporting it?
I don't know. And I have not looked at the sign-ons recently. The last time I looked at 5114, Senator Mullet was the only Democrat on it. And then just the House version was just dropped last night. And so there will still be members adding their names to it. I think the Democrats are under pressure to do something about the reopening plan. I think this will be part of the sort of broader discussion about what goes in the budget, what they're doing for business relief. It's all tied together in sort of big picture dynamics. It's hard to say right now whether the bill's going to move or not.
Mhm.
The same is true with the governor's emergency authorities. There are tons of Republican and I think entirely Republican sponsored bills to reduce and roll back the governor's emergency authorities. I remember, the governor would have to sign anything that actually gets passed by the legislature. But I know there's a bill out there by the chair of Ways and Means, Senator Rolfus, to limit the governor's expenditure authority in times of emergency and to require additional legislative engagement on expenditures, right? He's been spending all this federal CARES money with only informal consultation with legislative leaders for 10 months, basically.
Yeah.
Even
2.95 billion.
Yeah. Even Democrats are saying they don't think that's appropriate. Do they end up, how strongly do Democrats really feel about this? And are they really willing to leverage the governor into a position where he has to accept something in order to get, his greenhouse cap and trade bill, some of those other priorities for him? I don't know. Those are high level caucus discussions that people like me are never engaged in.
Okay.
I have the other bill that Representative Theringer put his name on is that Jefferson County .09 bill. That was the one we didn't mention. And then here, I'm going to put in the link to, here's a link to Senator Vanderweg's bills.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So it is 8:45, and we said we were going to end this fairly early so that people could jump off. And does anybody have any further questions for Josh? Because if not, I'm going to stay on with folks. Mike Reichhoff is on from the Small Business Development Center, as is Micah Jeanette from the Center for Inclusive Entrepreneurship. And if any of the businesses have questions or if they're having trouble accessing PPP funds or anything like that, they can go ahead, stay on, and we can see if we can get some of those questions answered for you. Anyway, if no one has any further questions for Josh at this point, I think we'll wrap this section up. Does anyone? If so, go right ahead. Debbie, do you? No, you're just waving. Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much, Josh, for your exceptional professional work that you do on behalf of both Clallam and Jefferson counties. And I'm really glad that we're involved this way and our voice is being heard in Olympia through you and in a more organized manner.
Thank you. Nice to see you all. And I will say, Colleen, the questions that you had about 5114, some of those dynamics, I think I'm coming back in a month to talk with you again. Let's have that conversation again and see what it looks like a month from now.
Yes, absolutely. It'll be interesting to see how everything has morphed by then.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, sounds good. Bye, everybody.
Thanks, Josh. So I just wanted to use this opportunity if people have questions. And Mike, do you want to turn your screen on? And Micah, Jonette, and if you guys want to put your emails in the chat to make sure if somebody wanted to ask a question offline, they could. So we were talking briefly beforehand, and let's see, Priya hadn't yet been able to get with Clallam Mosaic. They're the county's nonprofit that works with disabled people, people with disabilities, right, Priya? That's the right way to say that.
Right.
And so it does, and I see Julie Hatch is also online. She's with Kitsap Bank. Julie, Kitsap Bank has their PPP loan application process active right now, correct?
Yes, they do.
And also, now, is it true that if someone got a first round PPP loan, they really are better off going to who they worked with the first time around to get a second loan?
I have not gotten involved with this second round yet. I was involved with the first. I haven't heard that, but to me, it seems logical. It would be a lot easier. So
Yeah.
I can find out and let you know.
The main reason it's easiest is they will have some information on hand that's needed for the application, which such as like your first round application number and stuff like that.
Mhm.
So you can go to a different bank, but you save a step or two going to the same one.
Mike, is there anything you're thinking right now is important to share with folks?
Did you, I wasn't able to be on that presentation yesterday that I saw you were listening to with regards to Steve. Did you get any clarification on the 25%, whether it's just for first draft or second draft or both?
Yes, there was pretty clear clarification that that is only for second
Okay.
applications. If it's a first, you don't have to show that. And it's up to 10 million. If it is your first round, your first draw, I guess they're calling it.
Yeah, draw. Okay.
Mhm. So that, that makes it pretty lucrative for folks. You do have to attest to the fact that due to economic conditions, it is, this amount is needed for continuing, for the business to be able to continue going forward, something along those lines.
Sure.
But you do have to attest to that.
What
Okay.
have you found with people that were turned down the first time for the PPP? Their chances of getting a PPP the second time around to go, hire people back? I'm thinking restaurants in particular that haven't been able to reopen under this new set of guidelines.
Yeah, so I mean, the restaurants they're getting the 3.5 instead of 2.5 for the average monthly payroll.
But they haven't had payroll since first quarter of last year, really.
But
most
you-
of the
But they
offices
can
have
use the
reopened by
2019.
themselves.
They can use their
Yeah.
2019 numbers for the calculation.
Okay,
And they don't have to hire people back if the economy shut down.
but they still
Yeah.
should be able to get the PPP money for when they
Yes.
can reopen?
The only issue that I've been thinking about is the timing. You have 8 weeks or 24 weeks to spend the funds. So
Right.
that's been one of the thoughts, but the flexibility with the second round is so much more because you can also use the funding for, cost of goods sold items. I mean, almost anything really. There's still a 60% requirement, I believe, for payroll, but the flexibility as far as how to use the funds with the second round is so much more vast, particularly for those restaurants.
What have you found with the commercial rent relief? Or has there been any? Is it just for residential renters?
Yeah, I have not heard anything
Yeah.
yet about rent relief for businesses. I haven't seen anything about that. I know there's a lot of discussion in Olympia about it, but from what I understand, there hasn't been anything that has come out about
Oh,
that. Now, keep in mind, the landlords are allowed to work with their banks to extend their loan periods. So they don't have to make payments to their bank right now, but they're going to have to eventually.
Correct. And that's scaring some landlords.
Sure. Yeah,
Lately,
with me.
especially if they were mortgaged, you know, I mean, it's
Yeah.
easier when you've got a property that's free and clear and all you got really is your taxes and maintenance and repair.
No.
So the business owner would be, it would be beneficial to them to be able to get the PPP so they could pay their landlord the rent and have that deducted over the next, 24 weeks until they can get back reopened.
And so I got a question. Why would anyone ever pick 8 weeks over 24 weeks?
Unless they have a big payroll that they can knock it out real quick and get it
Yeah.
forgiven.
My
It's a matter
perspective
of,
was would it affect you later? So if you could spend it within the 8 weeks, then it would be advantageous to do the 8-week process, because then if there's something else that comes in behind it, then you wouldn't be restricted because of that. Which leads me to my last question, and then I'm going to jump off, is do we know if the business is doing a first round draw this time, when can they do a second round draw, or can they do a second round draw, or how does that work? Will they still be able to do 2 draws? Because I kind of feel like it the way the systems are set up.
Mike's gonna have to research that one.
yeah, well, I would think it would be hard to get through their 8 or 24 week period before the program expires
Yeah, March
to do the
31st.
second draw.
Yeah,
So I think it would be very hard to get a second draw in and get all your periods in.
and it ends on March 31st, correct? I mean,
Yeah, I
if
believe
this-
that's correct.
so 24 weeks, but what I don't understand too is 24 weeks is about 6 months, a little less than 6 months.
Mhm.
So, but here we are in February or January, and so is March 31st the last date that someone can apply for a PPP loan? Is that what that means? Because I thought the covered
Yes.
period was.
Yeah,
Until
yeah, it's-
March
Extend it over to
31st.
24. Sorry, Mike.
Okay. That piece was really confusing to me.
yeah.
I think it would be possible. I think it would be possible for some of my businesses. It depends on how much the loan is and how much the payroll is. But what if the business is expanding? So their payroll costs are higher than what they were in 2019 or in 2020, depending on which year you used. And then who knows if it'll be extended. I mean, there's always that too.
And if you're expanding though, with the second draft, you have to meet that 25% reduction in gross revenues.
True.
Yeah.
In 2020 to 2019 though.
Yes.
Yeah.
For 1 quarter.
Yeah.
Yep.
So most of that's already done. So if they qualify for the second round, which of the probably 50 loans I was working on, I had probably 12 that could apply the second round. And then I have about 3 or 4 new ones this round. So that's kind of been the trend with the loans that I've been working with.
Yeah, I know it's daunting, but they've made it so much easier this time around with the one-page forgiveness application. And even if you got a first round and you haven't applied for forgiveness yet, they're wrapping both into one forgiveness application, right?
I hope not.
Isn't that, I've been told that's
an
coming.
option. That's an option, particularly if you're both are with the same bank.
Okay.
But if it depends on how much your loan is, right? If you're under 150, let's say you're at 100, you wouldn't want to wrap the 2 together.
Sure. Right.
Right.
Right. Good point. Yeah. I've just been helping really little businesses, have 3 employees or something, so they don't hit that.
Yeah.
One thing I didn't want to say about Debbie's question earlier about the landlords is if their loan is an SBA loan, the SBA is doing another 3 months of them getting to SBA is going to make the payments for their loans.
So can someone, if their renters are not paying, does it make sense for them to look at doing a refinance with SBA? For a 504?
I would think that it would make sense, and like I said, it's depending on if you get your refinance approved at the right time, they are making 3 months worth of payments for you. But,
So-
last time it was 6 months, but this time it's 3 months.
Who does 504 loans here locally, other than, I know Kitsap Bank does.
Sound does, but they also have to get Evergreen involved for the CDC portion of it.
Okay, but Kitsap Bank doesn't have to do that. They're a preferred lender, as I understand, and they can approve those loans internally.
Okay.
And I understood, I found out from First Federal that they received preferred lender status, but they never implemented it. So now they have an SBA division and a vice president. So they're trying to institute that this year.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Mike, SBA funding for infrastructure improvements. Is that something they do?
Yeah, that would be the 504 loans. That would be,
That'd be the 504 loan. Okay.
yeah.
It's got to be real property owned by a private entity.
Well, the thing is, I'm in the process of trying to bring the sewer into the Eastern UGA. And so I have the book of how to do a local, an LID or an RID. And I'm working on that part of it, but I own a chunk of the land that the sewer is going to be going across, so I don't know if I want to try and get the loan to get it done faster. I have, and then do a reimbursement agreement.
I don't
So
think
anybody that hooks up.
I don't think that would apply, Debbie,
Yeah.
because it's got to be for a for-profit business.
Correct.
The infrastructure has to be in support of a for-profit business.
Okay, all right.
Mhm.
I have another one that might fit that category.
But you've looked at the USDA options for that?
I haven't.
I'll try to find the